sound speeds. And as you know, the Speed Bumps podcast is a thing of the past. And the reason why is because in the year 2023, I got a CDL Class A driver's license. And part of the commitment you make when you become a professional driver is to not drive distracted. And that, of course, means videotaping yourself and interacting with the camera at the same time while you're driving down the road. So I'm not going to be doing that anymore going forward. However, there are many people, especially professionals that work in the motion picture and television industry, that got a value out of the Speed Bumps podcast and the format of it. So I'm going to say, let's start off with 10 episodes of a similar style podcast, but sitting right here, where it's a direct address. I'm going to take a couple of topics per episode, unless there's a question you guys would like to submit for me to answer, in which case I will respond in this particular format. And I'm also not going to record all the episodes months in advance like I did for Speed Bumps. For Speed Bumps, I knew I was going to be getting a CDL Class A. So before I got the license, I actually recorded all the episodes for Speed Bumps. And that was something like 20 some odd extra episodes that I had not recorded it, but to that time. And I got them all done in spring of 2023 and then just rolled them out over the course of the year. So it was kind of interesting recording that many episodes in advance and then just editing them on the fly throughout the year and then airing them. Because by the time it aired, I kind of forgot about what the topics were and I had to rediscover what that was and rewatch them and then just put the information up accordingly. But this is going to be different because I'm going to only shoot a couple of episodes at a time. And then if I'm getting any questions, then I will answer those in upcoming episodes. So if you have a question you would like me to answer, please email it to alan@soundspeeds.us or I would say write it down in the comments below, but actually, you know what? alan@soundspeeds.us is going to be the best way to reach me. And there is links down in the description, or at least the email address itself is written in the description below if you would like to use it and send me a question via email to address in one of these podcasts. And going forward, I'm going to do it more like this. And I'm going to order a 10 episode test, I think. Just thinking about it, I think that's going to be a good number. That will give me an idea of if the people, the main crowd of the Speed Bumps podcast, which were motion picture and television pros, if you guys are getting value out of it, then we'll see if we continue on past 10 episodes. But for right now, that's what I'm going to commit to. Let's waste no more time and get right into our first question. And when I say question, I don't mean a question submitted by a viewer. I simply mean it's a topic I'm going to discuss, and that is buying an old versus a new microphone. There's been a lot of talk about this topic online, and one of the big things that people used to do is buy a used microphone to get a discount on it. The biggest problem that you run into when you buy used is you don't know the quality of that microphone if it's been abused. You also don't know if it's a bootleg. Sometimes people will, through no fault of their own, they'll buy something and not realize that it is a counterfeit product. And unfortunately, websites that sell I did a video called Beware OEM a while back where I talked about cheap off-brand, imitation microphones. And I've also talked about in the past the most counterfeited microphones that you run onto on the internet. Products like the Shure SM58, the SM57, the MKH50 or MKH416, I should say, from Sennheiser. There's a few others that are starting to hit the market where they're starting to kind of create imitations of those microphones. And it used to be that you could look for a humongous discount on them, and that would be an indicator that it's probably a counterfeit. Like the MKH416, if you buy that new for $1,000 and it still sells new for $1,000 as of the time of this video. But it used to be that if you saw one of those being sold brand new for around $400, you knew it was going to be a counterfeit all day long. The problem is a lot of counterfeiters have picked up on this. They realize that by offering a deep discount, it's throwing a red flag. So they're selling them now for $900, $950. That way you're still getting a discount and it pulls their website store up to, one of the forefront ones that you're going to run into and say, wow, that is it's clearly, the microphone I'm looking for and at a better price than I'm going to find on B&H or Gotham Sound, True Audio, Audio Guys, something like that, any of those pro websites. And so you look at it and say, I think I might try one of those. I think I might go ahead and grab one because it saves me $50, $100, something like that. It couldn't possibly be a fake if it's going to be priced like that. Yes, it is. That is the problem that you're going to run into if you buy a well-known microphone off of any website that you are not familiar with. Do not do that. If you're going to buy one of those legendary microphones that people all know, like the 416, Shure SM58, 57, something like that, then or Beta 58A, get something like that from an actual website that you recognize, like B&H, True Audio, Gotham Sound. The price of those microphones is going to be consistent all the way across the board. You're not going to see fluctuations on it. It's going to be $1,000 for the MKH 416. You're going to see the same kind of prices for the Shure products everywhere you look, except on discount websites that are probably selling a bootleg. And the reason why that is because most of the time, those manufacturers, they kind of dictate what the price should be, the minimum price. And since the manufacturer kind of specifies that price as a minimum, most people are going to price it at that minimum to try to generate a sale. They might sometimes have a sale on it, but it's extremely rare. As a matter of fact, I can't recall in any recent years any of those microphones being on any kind of a worthwhile sale that would make you say, I think I'm going to jump on that at this given time. So be aware that counterfeit microphones are out there. Now, if you are buying used, one of the big sources to go to is going to be something like Craigslist, maybe eBay, those kinds of websites. And if you buy one of the well-known microphones, it's a crapshoot. Are you going to get a new one? Are you going to get one that's counterfeit? Are you not going to get one that's counterfeit? You don't know, and you're not going to be able to tell unless you can get your hands on it. As a matter of fact, even if you buy it at a local store where somebody has sold the microphone, they're not always going to be able to tell if one of those microphones is an actual counterfeit or not. Many of those microphones this day and age are going to sound fairly decent. And unless you're A/Bing them and comparing, one to an actual real legit microphone, you're probably not going to be able to tell what it is. And you have to A/B them back and forth and listen to them. And it's probably going to be more work than you're going to run into in many of these local sound shops. They're not going to necessarily do that work. And if so, they might look at it and say, it's close enough. It probably is. It just might be that it's old and used. It might have a little bit of damage to it or something like that. If it is a condenser microphone, you're going to most likely hear a difference. But most of the microphones that you run into that are going to be those well-known brands, you really have to be careful about them. If it is a unique looking designed microphone, chances are it's going to be the real deal because it's going to take too much to counterfeit them on a major scale, as of this video at least. So the advantage to buying a used microphone is that you can buy some that are discontinued. Like, for example, one of my favorite ones, the CAD Equitech E100 vintage model that I used for probably the first 3 or 4 years of this channel in my direct addresses here on SoundSpeeds. But then over the course of time, because it is an electric condenser, it started to lose the charge on the back plate and it started to not sound nearly as good. So that's something you have to be aware of with an electric condenser. You got to get it charged. You got to get it repaired, something like that. And you got to get a charge put back onto the capsule and it'll last another 30 years or something like that. But unfortunately, that was not something I was able to get done on it. So it has been retired and it's in a bin over there. But it just started to kind of not sound nearly as good. And it wasn't because of the quality of the capsule, because that didn't change. It was starting to sound like it was almost like it was being undercurrented on like a power supply. If you've ever put too little current, like you have yourself a Denicky power supply box and the 9 volt starts to run kind of the charge starts to run out on that 9 volt and it's not able to supply the full current draw that the microphone requires. Then it starts to kind of sound overly sensitive. It will take hits and more plosives are going to affect the microphone easier. It's not going to have the same output. It's going to just sound totally different. It's going to be ultra sensitive for one, and it's going to start clipping and stuff very easily. It's going to maybe start to do staticky type sounds at times, things like that. But you don't normally run into that if you properly supply it with a full-fledged power supply from a mixer interface or a recorder. So that's something that you don't really have to worry about. But that's something to keep in mind also about these microphones. If you buy a used one, you can get a discontinued model. If you're trying to buy one that is currently on the shelf and you buy it used, you're going to not have a warranty on it. Probably. I mean, there may be some warranties that you can transfer, but most of the time you're not going to have a warranty on that microphone. Any damage that was done to the microphone is going to be yours when you buy it. It's going to be transferred over to you. You're going to have to deal with it. I bought a, an AKG, what was it? A 635 EB? Is that what the thing is? I bought it a while back. I did a video about it. And then, but right after I bought it and it was listed as in excellent working condition. Ends up being that the guy had like 12 of them. He listened to a few of them and then he says, I don't need to go through them all. They're all going to be good. And I bought the last one that he was selling. And when I listened to it, it was basically dead on arrival. It didn't sound good. I made him a video and I sent it to him. He listened to it and said, okay, I'll offer a refund. I said, no, I tell you what, if you offer me a refund, that's well and good, but then I would have to send the microphone back. I think, and he's like, no, you don't have to send it back to me if it's DOA, just I'll refund it. I'm like, in fairness to you, what if I were to send it off and get it fixed and set back to factory specs? And if I were to get it repaired and you just reimburse me the amount of the repair, what do you think about that? And the guy was like, yeah, sounds good. So I sent it to Harman, and they fixed it and sent it back to me. And the thing sounds absolutely wonderful. I love that microphone. I haven't used it in a long time, but it's a cardioid pattern and I can't use it up here. I use super cardioids here. He refunded me the amount. He was a man of his word, and he refunded me the amount that it cost to repair that microphone. They basically reworked the entire thing and set it back to factory specs. So I think it was a C535 EB, if memory serves. 535 just sounds familiar. I know the 636 is what they currently offer, but 535, I believe, is that model. Anyway, I bought that microphone used though. And it required a little bit of work, but it does sound really good. If you buy a brand new one, you are buying it brand new and you're the first owner of it, but be aware there's going to be potentially additional costs. If you happen to buy a lemon, you're going to have to replace that. And you're going to want to register the warranty on that. If it requires like an additional step, like if you buy a Rode microphone, most of those have a 10-year warranty on them. You just have to activate it on their website to get it extended from 1 year up to 10. And that's not a problem. Just, you got to register on another website. But that's the main thing that you got to be keeping in mind when you buy a new versus a used microphone. As with many products, you just have to do your research. If you're buying something that is a well-known product, the potential of you getting a bootleg is going to be extremely high if it's one of those well-known microphones, especially if the price is more discount. For our second topic, we're going to be discussing premium microphones with a microphone activator. On one of my videos that was called Got Clean Preamps, Do You Need One of These? I did discuss using a clean style preamp, something like a Sound Devices Mix Pre 6. This is what I used in the video, and compared it to microphone activators like a Cloudlifter, Fedhead, and a Dynamite DM1 from SE Electronics. And then there was a comment that recently came up asking me about why Royer recommends using it with a $1,500 ribbon microphone, the R121. Well, after going back and forth and a few questions back and forth with him, it looks to me, and this is just a sneaking suspicion, the reason why is because of impedance load levels. The Royer has, as he put it, an impedance of 300 ohms, which is pretty high for a modern microphone. And one of the things I mentioned is that matching microphones is something that was more popular and people really needed to nitpick it more back in the world of analog audio. He and I went back and forth and he's like, I think, I might want to reevaluate your statement there. But let me explain really where my mentality was on this. When you're talking about impedance and matching the impedance of a microphone, you need to make sure that the formula basically says whatever 10 times the impedance of a microphone is, you need to have that level on your preamps in order to properly drive the microphone with impedance loads. So if your microphone is, for example, 300 ohms, you need to have a microphone input that is at least 3,000, which is 10 times higher. And one of the things that I mentioned in my comments back to him is that most of the time this day and age, matching impedance isn't something you need to worry about. It was something more common in the world of analog, and that is true. In the world of analog, it took a lot more for you to get a higher impedance input. level. So in the world of digital, you're able to get a lot higher impedance levels simply by having a digital input on your mixer interface or recorder. Plus, more modern microphones have a lower impedance than they used to. If you have a 25 ohm microphone, which is not uncommon in 2023 or the 20s, I should say, then it's not uncommon for you to find an interface that could, without any effort, drive that with 250 ohms on your input level. And so even if you had a 100 ohm microphone, then finding an interface mixer or recorder that has at least 1,000, is not going to be an issue on the preamp. So it's not as big of a deal as it used to be. Now, if you're using something like the Royer R121, I have a sneaking suspicion the reason why Royer recommends the Cloudlifter CL1 is because it has 3,000 ohm. Basically, it is able to drive 3,000 ohms on the preamp of that. And I do say preamp because anytime you use something like a microphone activator, you are changing your preamps. If you spend a lot of money to get a really high quality mixer interface or recorder, or like the Sound Devices Mix Pre 6, extremely clean Cashmere preamps. If you take that and replace that with a Cloudlifter because you want to have a lower noise floor, if you do that, then the Cloudlifter becomes your preamp. People don't think about that, but the Cloudlifter at that point becomes your preamp because it's connecting up to the microphone, it's amplifying the signal and sending it down the line. It is preamplifying for you. The quality of the Cloudlifter then becomes your preamp and it replaces your preamp because it doesn't need to drive nearly as hard. Now, in this world, if you're talking about using something like a JFET in order to boost up your audio levels, basically what that's doing is increasing the voltage. A microphone puts out a very small amount of voltage, like millivolts, as a matter of fact, like 25 millivolts, and then something that is going to be a dynamic microphone that you would use for something like a Cloudlifter might put out 3 or 4 millivolts. And in order to increase that signal tremendously, you add phantom power to it, which is what the Cloudlifter does. You add phantom power and it creates basically an amplifier for the voltage. And that is going to amplify everything more evenly, including the noise floor, in relation to its level. So it's not going to be increasing the noise floor up nearly as high as most preamps will do. However, one thing that I've been saying for years at this point on this channel is I really wish more people would spend the money and buy a more premium interface if they're going to do any audio recording, because one of the big indicators for that is if it had at least 70 or 75 decibels of gain. It was more uncommon until the past year or two when more interfaces have been released that have at least 70 decibels of gain. Now, the reason why I've been recommending this, and people say, well, you can drive, a microphone just fine with 55 decibels of gain, and that's what my interface has. Yes, that's true. But here's the thing. When you measure the EIN of your mixer interface or recorder, here's what happens. And you can watch my video on exactly how to do it. And I walk through the process of it and show you how you can measure your own. But the thing is, though, at maximum level is where you measure your EIN. And so if your microphone is measured at the highest possible level, and then you back it off a few dB. Like, for example, if you have a 70 decibels of gain and you back it down to 55 decibels, which is what your microphone requires, as opposed to driving it all the way wide open with an interface that can supply 55 decibels of gain. If you supply 70 decibels of gain and then you back it off down to 55, your noise floor is going to drop. Now, it's not going to be a huge amount, maybe only a couple of decibels or something like that, 2, 4, something like that, but it's still going to be enough. And the reason why it's not going to be a full 15 is because decibels are logarithmic. And so you're going to lose the noise floor. It's going to drop, a little bit. It'll drop a few decibels. But that's the reason why, is if you have a 55 decibel interface, 55 decibels of gain, and then you compare that to a 70 decibel, you got to remember that is measured wide open. If you have 70 decibels of gain, it's going to be a more premium interface that's going to be able to supply more gain without the noise floor coming up, because most of the time those interfaces are going to have lower EINs and you're going to spend a little bit more money for it. But let me ask you this. Would you rather spend $150 for an interface that has 55 decibels of gain, or 60 even, or would you rather spend $250 and get 70 decibels of gain? To me, it's a no-brainer because if you get 55 decibels a gain or 60 decibels a gain, and then you start to question the noise floor performance, then you're going to have to do what? Spend about another $100, $150, something like that on a Cloudlifter or an off-brand, and then you might as well have bought the more premium interface. And that way everything is integrated and you don't have to have a separate device and with potentially an extra cable you connect up that's going to be another point of failure or another point of noise, something like that. Every time you have a connector, it is basically making a point where there's a point of failure. Anytime you have a connector or add another piece of gear, even if it's a cable or a Cloudlifter, you're adding another point of failure. That also means you have to remember to turn on the phantom power and supply that all the time. There's a whole bunch of things you have to keep in mind when you are adding another piece of gear. So what I normally recommend is getting an interface that has at least 70 decibels gain. And many of them now have 72, 75, 76. Sometimes they might even have more than that. But if I were to guess, the reason, to get back to our original topic, that Royer suggests that you get a Cloudlifter with it is not because of the gain. I'm sure they're assuming that you're going to have a more premium interface. But the guy that wrote me says that his interface only had the ability to drive about 1,500 ohms. So in his case, in order to get that 10x multiplier on a 300 ohm microphone, you're only going to get about a 5x on an interface that has 150 or 1,500 rather ohm inputs. So in that case, in order to properly do impedance load matching with your interface, he would need to have at least 10 times the ohms of the microphone on the preamp. And in order to do that, he would need to probably get something like a Cloudlifter, which states the specification straight up front that it supplies 3,000 ohms on its input. So that is my sneaking suspicion as to why that was the case. And I could be mistaken, but I don't think I am. Well, there you have it. The very first episode of this new podcast format, I guess, the number 1 of 10 that we're going to be doing as a test. And if this continues on, I need a name. So if you have any name suggestions for this particular type of podcast, keeping in mind I did the Sound Speeds podcast early on in the world of Sound Speeds, I could always return. We could call it the Return of the Sound Speeds podcast. Who knows? But I'm looking for a name. And if you have any questions or you would like to submit a name recommendation for this, please, by all means, suggest names down in the description. And if you have a question, email me at alan@soundspeeds.us. Thank you for tuning into this premiere what is it? It's not a premiere. This is a pilot, the very first episode of this new podcast. I should just end right now while I'm ahead. I'm not even ahead, am I? Let's just get out of this thing. Thanks for tuning in to this first episode of this new podcast format, and I will see you in the next one. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.